Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. So we are in day 3 of the war between Israel, the US, and Iran, and it's a crazy time to be living here in Jerusalem. We are fortunate to have a relative that has a protective room in his house in Mamad, and it's been just a wild, I would say, 8 months in our lives because Ezra, our son, was born literally a couple of days after the ceasefire was reached. So he spent the last couple of weeks of Hannah's pregnancy trying to prepare for what to do if she gave birth in a shelter. The first day of his life, a rocket siren. We were in this accommodation just a month ago because there was a leak in our roof that the landlord didn't fix. Out of our homes for a month, and now we're back in between sleeping in a car park and here. So it's just been a wild period of time. I'm just looking forward to the war ending as soon as possible and reaching some kind of stability, because I feel like it's not been a normal period by any stretch. One of the things that we've talked about on this podcast a lot is the sensory world, and I mentioned that I have ADHD, and I've come to understand over time how much my sensory world makes a difference to my experience in life and having control over some of it. It doesn't need to be, I don't wear, earplugs every day or blackout curtains, in the room, but especially when the stress level is higher, that's when the load, I really like that glass analogy of you have a tipping point, and it doesn't matter what particular sense is adding water to that glass. But once you introduce stuff like screaming children, plus background stress, plus a jackhammer and the neighbors, is renovating, and you can get to that point where it all kind of comes together. And I guess what I've been thinking about in some of our last episodes and discussions is what to do about that, because we can talk about de-escalation and prevention methods, but I really like the idea of there's something to be said about stuff like earmuffs. If we talk about screaming and earplugs, we take back control over a stressful situation, but there's something else to be said about things like background noise and soothing music. It's almost like it's a proactive approach. We're actually doing something before we have, or maybe even after the overstimulus is over, and we're feeling frazzled, but there's no noise to block anymore, but our nerves are maybe a bit frayed. And I love the idea of creating these spaces. We talked about neuro architecture that are kind of sensory rewind buttons. There's no more senses for us to undo. It's at the end of the day. Now we're trying to calm everything back down, reach our our point of homeostasis again. We've talked about the importance of lighting in that, how different, and this is, again, there's so many, I do have a lot of criticisms, you could say, a bone to pick with the public shelters and shelters in general in Israel, which so much of the population rely upon. And I was just thinking that we've had 8 months after the last war to try learn some lessons and make them a bit more dignified. And I was sitting there the other day in the shelter with these insanely bright incandescent bulbs, lying flat on the ground. There's no pillows, and I was just like, this is miserable from a sensory standpoint. This is a place where we're trying to seek shelter from a war. We can hear sirens and missile interceptions. Could someone have thought about making the lighting just a little bit more calm, or putting in a couple of pillows, or a couple of calm colors? We talked about color, right? And these are just all things that I think, it's crazy that we've just kind of said, here's a windowless room with bright lights, and you might have to spend 2 weeks there and more, people would lose their freaking mind. And yeah. So anyway, Herman and Corn, let's get back to talking about what I wanted to talk about today, which is soundscapes. So I came across this app called, one second, it is called, our producer's offline today, Endel, Endel. And there's been a few of these over the years, apps for creating different sound environments or sound bathing, right? We have the classic white noise, brown noise, pink noise trio. Then we have these apps that simulate certain things like wind or rain or coffee shops. There's hardware machines. We have a few electro fans at home. There are binaural beats. So there's no shortage of technologies that say we are backed by science, or this is the best hardware for masking noise or for calming. And I'd like to focus on that latter part of the picture, for calming. Is there any science to back specific types of sound? What Endel claims is intriguing. It makes promises that it's leveraging AI to come up with personalized sound environments that are stress relieving. Love to know what you think about the science being advertised there, but also what the research says in terms of sounds that actually work. Because I keep thinking in Israel, where I'm recording this from, we must have developed some good institutional experience over the course of these conflicts in dealing with anything that can take a population that is very stressed, understandably, and do anything to just tone down the tempo, especially for young children, which are kind of sponges for what's happening around them. And we have that cascading effect. If we can calm the adults, the carers, we can calm the children, and the children will be less stressed, and they'll be less fussy and less cranky, and then there'll be less stress for the parents. So I keep thinking that if it's really a cycle we need to create, and if we can create nice environments, we might actually be able to make surviving periods like this a whole bunch easier. So Herman and Corn, I know, of course, there's many, sadly, conflict hotspots in the world besides Israel, and I'd love to know your take on this concept of sound bathing. Is white noise the gold standard? Is it very individualized, what we like and find relaxing? And what products do you recommend? There's no shortage, as I mentioned, from smartphone apps through to much more sophisticated hardware systems. But before going out to any big tech store and wasting money on something of dubious efficacy, what would you say is a good baseline that you might have and might actually reduce the stress level in the room just a small bit?
It has been a heavy week in our house, hasn't it? Between the sirens and the general tension in Jerusalem, especially with the missile strikes today and the shelter-in-place orders, it feels like everyone is on edge. Our housemate Daniel was actually just talking about this in the prompt he sent over. He has been spending a lot of time in the mamad lately, that is, the protected room for those of you listening outside of Israel, and he was describing the sensory nightmare of it all. Bright lights, echoing concrete, and that constant low-level hum of anxiety.
Herman Poppleberry here, and yeah, Daniel really hit on something profound. When you are in a survival situation, your brain is already in high alert mode. It is scanning for threats. And when you combine that with poor sensory design, like those flickering incandescent bulbs or the sound of a jackhammer next door, it is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Especially for someone with ADHD, where the brain already struggles to filter out irrelevant stimuli.
It is that glass analogy Daniel mentioned. We talked about this a bit back in episode 777, when we were discussing parenting through conflict. Your sensory glass is already 90% full just from existing in a war zone. One more loud noise or one more harsh light, and it just overflows. But today, Daniel wanted us to look at the proactive side of this. Not just blocking things out, but actually using sound to recalibrate the nervous system. He mentioned soundscapes and sound bathing, specifically looking at apps like Endel.
I love this topic because it bridges the gap between physics, biology, and high-level technology. Soundscapes are not just background noise. They are carefully constructed acoustic environments designed to elicit a specific physiological response. And sound bathing, while it sounds a bit new age, actually has some solid grounding in psychoacoustics. When we talk about calming the nervous system, we are really talking about moving from the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight mode, into the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode.
So let us start with the basics of what actually works. Daniel asked if white noise is the gold standard or if it is more individualized. Most people think white noise is just that static sound from an old television, but in the world of acoustics, the color of the noise matters quite a bit. Herman, can you break down why we might prefer pink or brown noise over the standard white noise?
Absolutely. White noise is technically equal power across all frequencies. It is like a wall of sound that covers everything from the low rumbles to the high shrieks. But the human ear does not hear all frequencies equally. We are much more sensitive to high frequencies, so to our ears, true white noise often sounds harsh or hissy. That is why many people find pink noise more pleasant. Pink noise has more power in the lower frequencies, which mimics the patterns we find in nature, like the sound of rain or wind in the trees.
And then there is brown noise, which I know you have been using lately while you research.
Brown noise is even deeper. It is like the low roar of a distant waterfall or a heavy thunderstorm. For people with ADHD, brown noise is often the real gold standard. There was actually a fascinating meta-analysis published in 2025 by Dr. Joel Nigg that looked at this. It confirmed that while white and pink noise provide a small but statistically significant boost to attention for those with ADHD, it actually hurts performance for neurotypical people. It is called stochastic resonance. The noise provides a consistent, predictable flow of sound that allows the prefrontal cortex to relax its scanning mechanism. If the room is silent, your brain is waiting for the next pin to drop. If the room is filled with brown noise, the pin drop is masked and the brain stops looking for it.
That makes a lot of sense. It is about reducing the signal-to-noise ratio of the environment. If the background noise is constant and predictable, the sudden sounds, like a door slamming or a siren in the distance, do not have the same jarring impact on the nervous system. But Daniel also asked about the AI side of this, specifically Endel. I have looked into their tech, and they are doing something much more sophisticated than just playing a loop of rain sounds.
Endel is fascinating because they are using what they call a generative sound engine. Most sleep apps just play a 3-minute file of a forest and loop it. The problem is that the human brain is an incredible pattern recognition machine. Even if you are asleep, your subconscious can eventually pick up on the loop. Once the brain recognizes a pattern, it can either habituate to it, which is good, or it can become annoyed by it, which is bad. Endel avoids this by generating the sound in real time based on inputs like your local weather, the time of day, and even your heart rate if you have a wearable connected. They even claim their soundscapes can provide a 7 times increase in focus compared to standard playlists.
They also use specific musical scales, right? I remember reading that they rely heavily on the pentatonic scale.
Exactly. The pentatonic scale is naturally consonant. It lacks the dissonant intervals that create tension in Western music. By staying within that scale and using algorithms to ensure the sounds never repeat exactly, they create a soundscape that feels alive but never demanding. They have even collaborated with artists like Grimes and James Blake to create these wind-down environments. It is the difference between a song that wants you to listen to it and a soundscape that wants to hold space for you.
I think the personalization aspect is key here. Daniel asked if relaxation is individualized, and the answer is a resounding yes. We actually touched on this in episode 797, when we discussed the shift toward context engineering in AI. What works for me might not work for you. Some people find the sound of a busy coffee shop incredibly focusing, while for others it is pure chaos. The science suggests that our personal history with certain sounds plays a huge role. If you grew up in a city, the sound of distant traffic might be your version of a lullaby. If you grew up in the country, that same sound might signify danger or stress.
There is also the concept of binaural beats, which Daniel mentioned. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the marketing around binaural beats. The idea is that if you play a slightly different frequency in each ear, say 300 Hz in the left and 310 Hz in the right, your brain perceives a third tone, a beat, at 10 Hz. Proponents claim this can entrain your brainwaves to specific states, like alpha for relaxation or theta for deep sleep.
And what does the actual peer-reviewed research say? Is it legitimate or just placebo?
It is a bit of both. There is evidence that it can affect mood and anxiety levels, but the idea that it can literally force your brain into a specific state like a remote control is an oversimplification. However, in a high-stress environment like a shelter, even a strong placebo effect is worth its weight in gold. If your brain believes it is being calmed, it will start the process of calming down.
Let us move into the practical side. Daniel is looking for recommendations, both apps and hardware. If you're in a concrete room with 10 other people and a crying baby, what is the actual gear that makes a difference?
First and foremost, you need high-quality active noise cancellation, or ANC. We are past the point where this is a luxury. In a high-stress sensory environment, ANC is a medical necessity for some people. The current kings of the hill are the Sony WH-1000 XM6, which just came out last year with that new QN3 chip, and the Bose Quiet Comfort Ultra 2nd generation. The Sonys have 12 microphones now, which makes their transparency mode incredibly natural. That is crucial in a shelter because you might want to block out the hum of the ventilation, but still hear if someone speaks to you.
I have also been seeing more about these specialized sleep buds. Since Daniel mentioned the difficulty of sleeping in these environments, what about the hardware designed specifically for that?
Yes, the Oslo Sleep Buds are the spiritual successors to the ones Bose discontinued. They are tiny, they fit entirely inside the ear canal so you can sleep on your side, and they use a clever smart case to handle the Bluetooth streaming. This is an important distinction. Streaming music directly to tiny buds requires a lot of battery. By having the case act as the bridge, these buds can stay incredibly small while still playing masking sounds or your own podcasts all night. For someone like Daniel, who is trying to sleep on a floor or in a cramped space, having something that does not stick out of the ear is a game changer.
What about for the whole room? If you want to lower the stress level for everyone, not just yourself. Daniel mentioned the bright lights and the noise. We have talked about the importance of lighting before, but in terms of sound, is a dedicated white noise machine better than a phone and a Bluetooth speaker?
In my opinion, yes. A dedicated machine like the Electrofan is superior because it uses a high-quality, non-looping digital chip that produces a much richer, more organic sound than a tiny phone speaker can manage. Plus, it is a set-and-forget device. You turn it on, and it becomes part of the room's architecture. It creates a privacy curtain. In a crowded shelter, that privacy curtain is vital. It allows people to have low-volume conversations without being overheard by everyone else, which significantly lowers the social anxiety of the space.
I want to go back to the lighting for a second because Daniel specifically mentioned those incandescent bulbs. If you're in a situation where you cannot change the fixtures, what are the quick fixes? I have seen people using colored gels or even just silk scarves, though you have to be careful about heat with those.
Lighting is the other half of the sensory equation. High color temperature, that blue-white light you find in many industrial or emergency spaces, suppresses melatonin and keeps the body in a state of high cortisol. If you can, getting some portable, battery-powered LED lanterns, like the ones for BioLight or even the newer warm spectrum Goal Zero lights, can transform a space. They allow you to adjust the color temperature to a warm, amber hue, which signals to the brain that it is time to wind down.
It is about reclaiming agency. I think that is the core of what Daniel is asking. When you are in a conflict zone, you have lost control over so much of your life. You cannot control the sirens. You cannot control the news. You cannot control the safety of your home. But if you can control the 3 feet of space immediately around your head, it gives the nervous system a place to anchor.
That is a beautiful way to put it, reclaiming the sensory perimeter. And for children, like baby Ezra, this is even more critical. Infants are incredibly sensitive to the emotional state of their caregivers. If the parents are frazzled by the noise and the light, the baby will be too. By using a portable white noise machine or a soundscape app, you are not just helping yourself, you are creating a buffer for the child. It is like that oxygen mask analogy. You have to secure your own sensory environment before you can help your child secure theirs.
Let us talk about some of the lesser-known apps for people who might not want the AI complexity of Endel. I know a lot of people swear by dark noise on iOS.
Dark noise is great because it is simple and the sound quality is top-notch. It has a huge variety of sounds, from heavy rain to a spaceship interior, and it allows you to mix them. If you want 70% brown noise and 30% distant thunder, you can slide those faders and save it as a preset. It is very tactile. For an ADHD brain, sometimes having that level of control is therapeutic in itself.
And for those on Android, there is an app called Atmosphere that does something similar. It has these binaural settings and a lot of natural recordings. But Herman, I want to push you on the science of specific sounds. Is there any evidence that something like bird songs or water actually has a different effect on the brain than just plain noise?
There is. It is called the biophilia hypothesis. The idea is that humans have an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. Studies have shown that listening to natural soundscapes can lower heart rate and blood pressure more effectively than synthetic white noise. Our brains are hardwired to interpret the sound of a bubbling brook or gentle bird song as a signal of a safe, resource-rich environment. In contrast, total silence or harsh mechanical noises can be interpreted as a sign that predators are near or that the environment is hostile.
So, in a shelter, which is the definition of a mechanical, hostile environment, injecting those natural sounds is almost like a form of nutritional supplement for the brain. You are giving it the signals of safety that it is starving for.
Exactly. It is sensory nutrition, and we have to be intentional about it. We talked about this a bit in episode 156 when we were looking at the power of context in AI models. The context of your environment dictates your internal state. If your context is concrete and sirens, your internal state will be high alert. If you can shift that context, even just through your ears, you can shift your biology.
I think we should also mention the low-tech options. Daniel mentioned earplugs and earmuffs. Sometimes, the best soundscape is just less sound. For people who find even calming music to be too much, what is the state of the art in passive protection?
For passive protection, you cannot beat the loop earplugs. They have become very popular for a reason. They have different levels of attenuation. The loop experience allows some sound through so you can still have a conversation, but it takes the edge off the high decibel peaks. The loop quiet is for total blocking. They are made of soft silicone and are comfortable enough to wear for hours. For someone in a shelter who needs to stay aware of their surroundings but is being overwhelmed by the noise of a crowd, something like the loop experience is a perfect middle ground.
It is interesting how much of this comes down to filtering. The ADHD brain is often described as having a broken filter. Everything comes in at the same volume. By using these tools, whether it is an AI app like Endel or a physical filter like a loop earplug, we are manually doing the work that the brain's internal filters are struggling with.
And that is exhausting. That is why people with ADHD or sensory processing issues feel so drained after a day in a high stimulus environment. They are doing 10 times the cognitive work just to stay regulated. In a conflict situation, that exhaustion can lead to burnout very quickly. So these products are not just gadgets, they are tools for resilience.
I want to circle back to Daniel's mention of sound bathing. For those who have never heard the term, it usually involves Tibetan singing bowls, gongs, or chimes. It is a very resonant, harmonic experience. From a physics perspective, Herman, what is happening there?
It is all about resonance and entrainment. These instruments produce very pure tones with rich overtones. When those sound waves hit your body, you are not just hearing them with your ears, you are feeling the vibrations in your tissues. There is a theory that these frequencies can help synchronize the vibrations of the body's cells, though that is moving more into the realm of alternative medicine. However, from a purely psychological perspective, the slow, rhythmic nature of a sound bath encourages deep, diaphragmatic breathing. It forces you to slow down. You cannot rush through a gong hit. You have to wait for the sound to decay.
It is a forced meditation, which, again, for an ADHD brain that might struggle with traditional sit still and be quiet meditation, having an external anchor like a resonance sound can be much more accessible. It gives the focus something to chew on while the rest of the brain relaxes.
Precisely. It is a point of focus. And in a chaotic environment, a point of focus is a sanctuary. Whether that sanctuary is provided by a high-tech AI algorithm or a 1,000-year-old bronze bowl, the goal is the same, to give the nervous system a break from the constant scanning for danger.
So, to summarize for Daniel and anyone else in a similar boat, the science says that while white noise is good for masking, pink and brown noise are often better for relaxation and ADHD. Personalized, non-looping soundscapes like those from Endel are superior for long-term use because they prevent habituation. And for hardware, don't skimp on ANC headphones or specialized sleep buds if you're trying to rest in a loud environment.
And don't forget the lighting. If you can't change the bulbs, bring your own warm light. Sensory hygiene is just as important as physical hygiene in a crisis. It keeps your mind sharp and your emotions regulated.
That is a great place to wrap up. Daniel, thanks for the prompt. It is a topic that feels especially relevant for us here in Jerusalem right now. but it is also something that applies to anyone living in a high-stress, high-noise world.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners, we hope this gives you some ideas for how to create your own sensory sanctuary wherever you are. If you found this episode helpful, or if you have your own tips for sensory regulation in high-stress environments, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, please do reach out through the contact form at myweirdprompts.com. And if you have a second, leaving a review on Spotify or your favorite podcast app really does help other people find the show. We appreciate the support of our community more than we can say.
It really does make a difference. This has been My Weird Prompts. We're on Spotify and the web at myweirdprompts.com.
Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you next time.
Until next time.
I was just thinking, Herman, about that coal mining episode we did, episode 892. We talked about the brutal sensory conditions in those mines. It is a different kind of stress, but the need for sensory recovery is the same. Humans are not built to be under constant sensory assault.
That is so true. Whether it is a coal mine or a modern city or a conflict zone, we have to be proactive about our sensory health. Our brains are these incredible, sensitive instruments, and we have to treat them with a bit of care.
Exactly. All right, that is it for today. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care.
One last thing. I was looking at the price of those Oslo buds Daniel might be interested in. They are around $274 to $350. It is an investment, but if it means getting 6 hours of sleep instead of 2, the return on investment for your mental health is huge.
Oh, absolutely. You can't put a price on a good night's sleep, especially when things are crazy. I'd pay that in a heartbeat if I were in his shoes.
Same here. All right, really signing off now. See you next week.
Bye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.